Tonight it ends. The Cowboys' answer changed everything Western romance story. The sun was slowly sinking behind the wide hills of Red Willow Town. The sky was painted with soft colors of orange and gold. Dust moved gently across the empty street as the evening wind passed through the quiet town. At the end of the street stood a tall man beside the wooden fence of a small ranch. His name was Caleb Walker. Caleb was known by almost everyone in Red Willow. People respected him. He was honest, hardworking, and calm. He spoke little, but when he did, people listened. Every morning he worked on his ranch before the sun even rose. He repaired fences, took care of horses, and checked the cattle across the open land. His life was simple, quiet, and predictable. But inside Caleb's heart, there was a story he never talked about. Many years ago, Caleb had been a different man. Back then, he laughed more. He spent time in town, talked with friends, and dreamed about the future. And in those dreams, there was always someone beside him, Emily Carter. Emily had once been the brightest part of Caleb's life. She was kind, cheerful, and full of energy. Her laughter could fill an entire room, and her smile had a way of making even the hardest day feel lighter. Everyone in town thought Caleb and Emily would someday build a life together. But life does not always follow the plans people make. One day, without warning, Emily left Red Willow. No one knew the full story. Some people said she wanted to see the world. Others believed she had simply grown tired of small-town life. Caleb never explained anything. He only worked harder after that. Years passed. Now the town saw him as a quiet cowboy who kept to himself. He rarely visited the saloon. He avoided long conversations. Most evenings, he simply stood outside his ranch house, watching the sunset over the open land. Tonight was no different. Caleb leaned against the fence, looking across the wide fields. His horse, Dusty, stood nearby, calmly chewing hay. The town street was slowly coming to life as people finished their work for the day. Lanterns began lighting up the windows of shops and homes. From down the road, music from the Silver Spur Saloon drifted softly through the evening air. Caleb usually ignored it, but tonight, something felt different. Dusty lifted his head suddenly, as if noticing someone approaching. Caleb turned his eyes toward the town road. A stagecoach had just arrived. The horses slowed to a stop in front of the small hotel. The driver climbed down and began unloading bags. Travelers stepped down one by one. Most of them were strangers passing through. Caleb glanced for only a moment, ready to turn away. Then he froze. A woman stepped down from the coach. She wore a light brown coat and carried a small travel bag. Her hair moved gently in the wind as she looked around the town. For a moment, Caleb thought his mind was playing tricks on him. But when she lifted her face toward the fading sunlight, there was no mistake. Emily Carter had returned. Caleb felt his chest tighten. Years of quiet memories rushed back all at once. Emily looked older now, but not in a sad way. Time had simply given her a calmer presence. The same gentle kindness still showed in her eyes. She looked around the town slowly, as if remembering places she once knew. Then her eyes stopped. They met Caleb's. For a long second, neither of them moved. The sound of the town faded away in Caleb's mind. It felt as if the past had subtly stepped back into the present. Emily took a slow breath and began walking toward him. Each step felt heavier than the last. Caleb stayed where he was, his hands resting on the wooden fence. When Emily finally reached him, she stopped a few feet away. For a moment, they simply looked at each other. Years of silence stood between them. Finally, Emily spoke. Her voice was calm, but there was something serious in it. "Hello, Caleb." Caleb nodded once. "Hello, Emily." The evening wind moved gently through the quiet street. Emily glanced around the ranch, the horses, and the fields that stretched far into the distance. "It looks the same," she said softly, "just like I remember." Caleb didn't answer right away. After a moment, he said, "Some things don't change." Emily looked at him carefully, as if searching for the right words. Then she spoke again. "Caleb, I didn't come back to stay long." Her words hung in the air. Caleb felt a quiet tension settle in his chest. Emily continued, her voice steady but serious. "There are things we never talked about, things we left unfinished." The sky was now darker, and the first stars had begun to appear. Emily looked directly into his eyes. We need to talk tonight. Caleb didn't move. Emily's next words were quiet, but they carried a weight that made the moment feel even heavier. Because tonight it ends. Caleb watched her carefully. He didn't yet know what she meant. But one thing was certain. After years of silence, the past had finally returned to Red Willow. And before the night was over, something important was going to change. Night slowly covered Red Willow Town. The last colors of the sunset faded, and soft lantern lights began to glow along the street. The air was calm, and the town felt quiet and peaceful. Caleb Walker stood beside the wooden fence of his ranch, still thinking about Emily's words. Tonight it ends. Those words stayed in his mind. Emily stood a few steps away, looking across the fields that stretched far beyond the ranch. The gentle wind moved through the grass, making a soft, whispering sound. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Years of silence had built a wall between them, and breaking that silence was not easy. Finally, Emily took a slow breath. "Can we talk somewhere quiet?" she asked. Caleb nodded. "There's a small cabin near the barn," he said. "We can sit there." Emily agreed, and together they walked slowly across the ranch. The ground made soft sounds under their boots as they moved through the dim lantern light. The cabin was simple but warm. Inside, there was a wooden table, 2 chairs, and a small lantern hanging on the wall. Caleb lit the lantern, and the soft yellow light filled the room. Emily sat down at the table, placing her travel bag beside the chair. Caleb remained standing for a moment before finally sitting across from her. Again, silence filled the room. Emily looked at Caleb carefully. "You look different," she said gently. Caleb gave a small smile. "Time changes people." Emily nodded slowly. "Yes, it does." For a few seconds, she looked down at her hands, as if gathering the courage to speak. Then she lifted her eyes again. "Caleb, when I left Red Willow, I thought you didn't care about me anymore." Caleb frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" Emily's voice remained calm, but there was pain behind it. "The night before I left, I waited for you at the old oak tree near the river." Caleb's expression changed. He remembered that place well. Emily continued. "You told me earlier that day you would meet me there. You said we needed to talk about our future." Caleb nodded slowly. "I remember." Emily's eyes lowered again. "But you never came." The words hung quietly in the air. Caleb leaned forward slightly. "I did go there." Emily looked up, surprised. "You did?" "Yes," Caleb said. "But when I arrived, you weren't there." Emily blinked in confusion. "I waited there for almost an hour." Caleb shook his head gently. "I waited too." Both of them sat silently, trying to understand what had happened. For years they had believed 2 very different stories. Emily spoke again. "I thought you changed your mind. I thought you decided I wasn't important anymore." Caleb sighed quietly. "And I thought you left because you didn't want to stay." Emily shook her head slowly. "No, Caleb. I left because my father told me you never came. He said you had already decided to focus only on your ranch." Caleb's eyes widened slightly. "I never said that." "I know that now," Emily said softly. The lantern light flickered gently on the wooden walls of the cabin. Years of misunderstanding slowly became clear. Emily looked around the small cabin. "For a long time, I believe you had chosen a different life." Caleb rested his hands on the table. "And I believe you had chosen one without me." A quiet sadness filled the room. 2 people who once cared deeply for each other had spent years apart because of a simple misunderstanding. Emily gave a small, thoughtful smile. "Life can be strange sometimes." Caleb nodded. "Yes, it can." Emily then looked directly into Caleb's eyes. "That's why I came back." Caleb waited for her to continue. She took a slow breath. "For years I kept wondering what really happened that night. I realized I never asked you. I never heard your side of the story." Caleb listened carefully. "So I came back to finally talk about it," Emily said. Outside the cabin, the wind moved gently through the trees. The night had grown darker, and the stars now filled the sky above Red Willow. Emily folded her hands on the table. "But, Caleb, I also came because I needed closure." The word felt heavy. Caleb remained calm but focused. "What do you mean?" Emily spoke honestly. "For years, I carried those memories with me. I couldn't move forward because I never understood what went wrong. She paused for a moment. That's why I said tonight it ends. Caleb watched her closely. Either we finally understand the past, or we close that chapter of our lives. The room became very quiet. For a long moment, Caleb said nothing. Emily studied his face. Try to understand what he was thinking. Finally, Caleb spoke. "And what do you want, Emily?" Emily looked at him thoughtfully. "I want the truth," she said simply. Caleb leaned back slightly in his chair. "You have it." Emily nodded slowly. "Yes, I think I do." But something still remained between them. Years of feelings, memories, and questions still rested quietly in the air. Emily spoke once more. "There is one more thing we never talked about." Caleb raised an eyebrow slightly. "What's that?" Emily looked at him with a serious but gentle expression. Whether the story between us truly ended, or if we were just too early to say goodbye. Caleb didn't answer right away. The lantern light flickered softly as the quiet cabin held their unfinished story. Outside, the peaceful night of Red Willow continued. But inside that small cabin, the past and the present were finally meeting. And before the night ended, Caleb knew he would have to give Emily the answer she had waited years to hear. The lantern in the small cabin burned quietly, filling the room with soft yellow light. Outside, the night was calm. The wind moved gently through the trees, and the distant sound of crickets filled the quiet air of Red Willow Town. Inside the cabin, Caleb and Emily still sat across from each other at the wooden table. Emily's last question still hung between them. Was our story really over, or did we say goodbye too early? Caleb did not answer right away. He leaned back slightly in his chair and looked down at the wooden floor, thinking carefully. Years of memories passed through his mind. Long days on the ranch, quiet evenings watching the sunset, and the empty feeling that had followed Emily's departure. For a long time, Caleb had trained himself not to think about the past. But tonight, the past was sitting right in front of him. Emily watched him patiently. She did not rush him. She understood that some answers needed time. Finally, Caleb lifted his eyes. "Emily," he said slowly, "for a long time I believe our story ended the day you left." Emily listened quietly. Caleb continued. "When you disappeared from town, I didn't understand why. I kept asking myself what I had done wrong." He paused for a moment before speaking again. But after a while, I stopped asking questions. Emily's expression softened. "Why?" she asked gently. Caleb gave a small, thoughtful smile. "Because asking questions didn't bring you back." The cabin became quiet again. Caleb looked toward the small window beside the table. Outside, the stars shined brightly across the dark sky. "For years," he said, "I focused only on the ranch. Work was easier than thinking about things I couldn't change." Emily nodded slowly. She could understand that feeling. "But that didn't mean I forgot you," Caleb added. Emily's eyes lifted slightly. "You didn't." Caleb shook his head. "No." He spoke calmly, but his words were honest. "Some memories stay with you, even when you try to move forward." Emily lowered her eyes for a moment, thinking about all the years she had spent wondering about the same thing. She had built a new life in other towns. She had met new people and seen new places. But the memory of Red Willow and of Caleb had never truly faded. After a moment, Emily spoke again. "When I decided to come back," she said, "I wasn't sure what I would find." Caleb listened carefully. "I thought maybe you had forgotten everything," she admitted. Caleb smiled slightly. "That would have been easier." Emily let out a small laugh. "Yes, it probably would." For a few seconds, the mood in the cabin felt lighter, but the important question still remained. Emily folded her hands on the table again. "Caleb," she said quietly, "when I said tonight it ends, I meant that I didn't want to carry these questions anymore." She looked directly at him. "I needed to know if our story was truly finished." Caleb understood. For years, both of them had lived with unfinished thoughts and unanswered feelings. Tonight was their chance to finally understand the truth. Caleb took a slow breath. Then he spoke. "If something is ending tonight," he said calmly, "it isn't our story." Emily blinked in surprise. Caleb continued. "It's the distance between us." The words were simple, but they carried deep meaning. Emily's eyes widened slightly. You mean? Caleb nodded. I mean that I never stopped caring about you, Emily. The room felt warmer somehow after those words. Emily looked down at the table for a moment, trying to hide the small smile forming on her face. You waited all these years, she asked softly. Caleb shook his head gently. No, I didn't wait in the way people usually mean. Emily looked up again. What do you mean? Caleb explained calmly. I lived my life. I worked. I built the ranch. I tried to move forward. He paused. But there was always a part of me that wondered what would happen if you ever came back. Emily felt her heart beat a little faster. And now that I'm here, she asked. Caleb leaned forward slightly. Now I finally get to say the things I should have said years ago. Emily's curiosity grew. And what are those things? Caleb looked at her directly. Our story didn't end back then, he said. It was just paused. Emily felt a quiet warmth spread through her chest. Years of confusion and sadness suddenly felt lighter. Outside, the wind moved softly across the open fields of the ranch. Emily slowly stood from her chair and walked toward the small cabin window. She looked up at the bright stars above Red Willow. It's strange, she said quietly. What is? Caleb asked. I came here tonight expecting to close a chapter in my life. She turned to face him again. But now it feels like something new is beginning. Caleb stood as well. Sometimes life offered people a second chance, but only if they were brave enough to accept it. Caleb walked closer to Emily and stopped beside the window. Maybe that's what tonight was meant to be, he said. Emily looked at him with calm eyes. And what about tomorrow? Caleb smiled. I guess we'll have to find out together. The peaceful night continued outside the cabin, but inside, the answer Emily had waited years to hear had finally been spoken. The night over Red Willow Town was peaceful and still. The sky was full of bright stars, and the soft wind moved slowly across the wide open land. Inside the small ranch cabin, Caleb and Emily stood near the window, looking out at the quiet fields. For years, both of them had carried questions about the past. Tonight, those questions had finally been answered, but the future was still unknown. Emily looked out at the ranch land. The fields stretched far into the distance, just as they had years ago. Some things had changed, but many things remained the same. This place still feels familiar, Emily said softly. Caleb nodded. Red Willow doesn't change very quickly. Emily smiled a little. That's one of the things I always liked about it. They stood quietly for a moment. The peaceful silence felt comfortable now, not heavy like before. Emily slowly turned toward Caleb. Caleb, I want to thank you for being honest tonight. Caleb gave a small nod. It was time. Emily agreed. For a long time I believed our story ended the wrong way, she said. But now I understand what really happened. Caleb leaned lightly against the wall beside the window. Sometimes life gives people the wrong timing, he said. But that doesn't always mean the story is over. Emily thought about those words carefully. Years ago, they had both been younger. They had made quick decisions based on confusion and misunderstandings. Now, time had given them both patience and understanding. Emily looked at Caleb again. So what happens now? She asked. Caleb smiled slightly. Well, tomorrow morning I still have work to do. Emily laughed softly. I expected that answer. Caleb continued. The ranch still needs fences repaired, horses checked, and cattle moved to the north pasture. Emily crossed her arms playfully. Sounds like a busy morning. It usually is. Emily walked slowly toward the wooden table and rested her hand on the back of the chair. For years I traveled from town to town, she said. I thought I needed to see the world. Caleb listened quietly. And did you? He asked. Emily nodded. Yes, I saw many places. I met many people. She paused for a moment before continuing, but something always felt missing. Caleb understood what she meant. Sometimes people search far away for something that had been close to them all along. Emily looked around the small cabin again. This place feels peaceful, she said. Caleb smiled. That's why I stayed. Emily turned toward him again. And if someone wanted to stay here too? She asked carefully. Caleb looked slightly surprised. You mean in Red Willow? Emily nodded. Maybe for a while. Caleb thought for a moment. Well, he said calmly, Red Willow has always welcomed good people. Emily smiled. And what about the ranch? Caleb raised an eyebrow playfully. The ranch can always use an extra pair of hands. Emily laughed softly. I may not know much about ranch work. Caleb shrugged. That can be learned. The warm feeling between them continued to grow. For years they had lived separate lives, but tonight had opened a new path for both of them. Emily walked toward the door of the cabin and stepped outside. The cool night air felt refreshing. Caleb followed her outside. The ranch looked beautiful under the moonlight. The horses rested quietly near the fence, and the wide land looked calm and endless. Emily looked up at the stars. They look brighter out here, she said. Caleb nodded. There are fewer lights in the countryside. Emily took a slow breath. It feels peaceful. They stood side by side, watching the quiet land that surrounded them. After a moment, Emily spoke again. Caleb, do you ever think about what life might have been like if things had happened differently years ago? Caleb thought carefully before answering. Sometimes. Emily waited. But I don't spend much time wishing for the past, he said. Emily looked curious. Why not? Caleb smiled gently. Because the past can change, but the future still can. Emily looked at him thoughtfully. That's a good way to see it. Caleb looked out across the ranch. You know, he said, when you first walked off that stagecoach today, I thought the past had come back to visit. Emily raised an eyebrow. And now? Caleb looked at her with a calm smile. Now it feels like the future just arrived. Emily felt warmth spread across her heart. For the first time in many years, both of them felt something simple and hopeful. Not regret, not confusion, just possibility. The wind moved gently through the grass as the quiet town of Red Willow rested under the starry sky. Emily looked across the ranch one more time. Maybe this is where my journey was always meant to bring me back, she said. Caleb nodded. Sometimes people travel far just to find their way home. Emily smiled. Maybe you're right. They stood together under the wide western sky, watching the peaceful land that stretched beyond the ranch. Their old story had once ended with silence and misunderstanding. But tonight, under the quiet stars of Red Willow, a new chapter had quietly begun.